And given, there are a lot of partisan dynamics in Oklahoma, how do you approach working across the aisle?
So I first tried to, I try to remember that everybody's a human being. Everyone has a story, and really trying to get to know people on a personal level. That helps me not get so caught up in the partisan differences and divisions that we see. And really, on a state level, there's so much that Republicans and Democrats can do together because at the end of the day, it's not conservative or liberal to fix a pothole. It's not conservative or liberal to, figure out how we educate children, or it shouldn't be.
Mhm.
Anyway, certainly there's like philosophical differences around how we fund government and where we get that money from and all of that. But at the end of the day, we want to solve problems. We want Oklahoma to do
Mhm.
well. It's just always been important to me to build friendships and relationships and all of the work I've ever done. And so I've taken the time to literally reach across the aisle and build relationships. I try to get to know their families and something personal about them so that I can connect there. That way, when the debate on an issue that we don't agree on, I don't fight them, I fight the issue.
Welcome to Medicine, Motherhood and Missions, the podcast where real life meets big dreams. I'm Johanna, your host, and every episode will dive into inspiring stories from PAs, doctors, and professionals who are also dreamers and mission-driven changemakers. From the hospital halls to the hearts of our homes, and even into communities across the world, we'll laugh, learn, and uncover the challenges, triumphs, and everything in between as we see life through each other's perspectives. Looking for more joy and balance in your career? Don't miss our free guide, How to Be a Fulfilled Provider. Your quick boost of encouragement with tips to help you thrive while juggling all your hats you wear. And if you've got little dreamers at home, check out Little Evie's Big Dreams on Amazon. These stories are meant to spark imagination, courage, and kindness, perfect for bedtime or anytime. Follow along as Evie, a little Sri Lankan girl, brings joy and creativity to her community while daring to dream big. This podcast is also brought to you with love by the Ephraim Foundation International, because empowering children and families in rural Sri Lanka isn't just charity, it's continuing a legacy of hope and creating futures full of possibility. So grab your cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and get ready for uplifting conversations that will leave you inspired and equipped to make a greater impact. Let's jump in. Welcome back to Medicine, Motherhood and Missions, where we share stories of leaders who serve with courage, lead with compassion, and bring hope to the communities they love. Today, I am honored to welcome a trailblazer whose life embodies a resilience, purpose, and a deep commitment to everyday Oklahomans. Leader Cyndi Munson is the Democratic leader of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, representing House District 85. When she was first elected in 2015, she made history as the first Asian American woman ever elected to the Oklahoma Legislature, flipping a long-held Republican seat and opening the door for a new generation of leaders. Raised in Lawton by a single father serving in the U.S. Army, Cyndi and her younger sister watched their dad work multiple jobs just to keep their family afloat. They moved 10 times before she graduated high school, all in the same town, chasing cheaper rent and stability. Those early years shaped her heart for service and her understanding for the real challenges families face. In office, Leader Munson has led with courage and collaboration. She spearheaded a bipartisan effort to repeal the state sales tax on groceries, fought to increase funding for public schools, pushed for teacher pay raises, held insurance companies accountable, and championed tax relief for everyday Oklahomans, not billionaires. Now she's running for governor of Oklahoma with a vision to strengthen education, support rural and urban healthcare access, build meaningful partnerships with tribal nations, and return power to the people on issues like reproductive freedom. In this conversation, we explore her journey from childhood marked by constant moves to becoming a statewide leader, her heart for mentoring young women, her plans for rural health, and what it is to really mean to bring Oklahomans together in a time of deep division. Settle in. This conversation is full of conviction, compassion, and the kind of leadership our world needs more of. Let's talk about courage and what it takes to lead when the world feels divided. So let's dive in. Thank you so much, Miss Cyndi, for joining me today on the podcast. It's a great pleasure to meet you and have you on.
Well, thanks for having me. Very grateful to be here and excited about our conversation.
Yeah, it's Been interesting reading and hearing more about your story. And I kind of wanted to, start there. Kind of like, how did you even come to where you are here today, running for governor of Oklahoma? In the intro, we kind of heard how your childhood was and how, many families in Oklahoma kind of face similar situations. How did your grit and determination to get to where you are start?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I attribute a lot of where I am today to my dad's military service. Being raised by a dad who served in the US Army certainly teaches you a lot about public service and what it means to defend your country and the things that we value. But also coupled with that are the challenges, and you highlighted a few of those. My dad ultimately raised my sister and I, but my mother's from Seoul, South Korea. And so, having a parent who's not from the United States, you see a lot of the challenges that they have to overcome and, quite frankly, overcome well to find employment and raise a family and things like that. But I would say a lot of the challenges that I faced growing up, especially financial challenges, really had me always looking for hope and optimism and how could I build a better future for myself and for my community. And it's always just been, I'm also the oldest of my sister and I. My sister's younger than me by 5 years. And so I think I just have some natural leadership abilities and tendencies just by being the older
Yeah.
sister, but also being raised by a single parent. You have to step up and do a lot of things that maybe at 13 and 14 you don't want to do or don't expect to do, but it just kind of, falls in your lap to keep your family afloat and keep your family moving forward, and so, I think a lot of just how I was raised, and then I'm very grateful. I'm a product of public schools. I went to Lawton Public Schools, so I was raised in Southwest Oklahoma, and I had great teachers and great counselors and people and adults in my life who helped me to see what possibilities were out there, and so I've just always gravitated towards leadership, public service. I've always been interested in what was going on in government. When I was growing up, I don't know that I had any kind of political leaning. I don't think children or adolescents do, but I just knew that I was always looking for people doing the good things and who was looking out for all of us. And so I took that into student government. I was student body president of my high school. When I was in college, I was very active in student government. My degree's in political science. But I've always just wanted to help my community, whether that was in school or on my college campus. My background is in the nonprofit sector. So I worked in nonprofit prior to running for office. But now, of course, most of my leadership and where I spend a majority of my time is in public service and in the political sphere here in our state. And I think we have a lot of challenges that people are facing. And I feel strongly that we need leaders who actually understand what people are going through. Having some of your own lived experience coupled with experience on how to make a difference is very necessary right now. And that's really what moved me and pushed me to make the decision to run for governor.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned quite a lot of different points in there. Coming from Lawton, I'm a physician assistant, and I recently met this older lady who was from Lawton, working with homeless populations there. And I know that's a difficult city in itself too, and that has different struggles. So and then that's another point of coming from a
Yeah.
struggling city in Oklahoma where you kind of see a lot of the realities of how people live, and you came from that background, so you kind of understand where Oklahoma is and what people need here, right?
Mhm.
And then the second point is your mom is an immigrant, and right now we have a lot of issues with immigration and, where we are with immigration here in the US and even in Oklahoma, how that will shape and be reshaped in the coming future. And you mentioned how, the struggle is real for those who do come and, have to learn everything and learn it well, as you said, to assimilate and to be able to kind of understand how to succeed and how to use those opportunities, which, we all come, I'm from an immigrant family myself, and so I totally understand that as well. So tell me a little bit about like, what lessons have you learned, about resilience and leadership through those experiences and becoming that first of Asian American to serve in the Oklahoma legislature.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say, while growing up, I had a lot of interest in politics and public service. I would say, I didn't quite understand what it looked like to run for office or be elected. And one of the things that really held me back from ever thinking it was something I could do was not having anybody who looked like me or truly represented sort of my story in political leadership in Oklahoma. And I remember having thoughts all the way in high school where I did start to think, because I was able to volunteer and I got more interested in local races that were happening in Lawton. And I paged at the Capitol and I was engaged in different programs like Girl State when I was in high school, where you do learn about what it's like to be in government. And I thought, this is great. I'm glad I'm able to learn, but I'll never be able to do it because I don't see a lot of women and I don't see a lot of women of color, and I certainly don't see any Asian American women. And it's very interesting because growing up, I really tried to hide that side of myself. I really struggled and had challenges with my mother. We have a challenging relationship. She was verbally and physically abusive to me and to my dad. And so it was really hard to identify or embrace that side of my identity because of that trauma. And then on top of that, none of my friends look like me. None of
Yeah.
there were not people who had, again, similar backgrounds. And when you're young, especially, you want to be like everybody else. And I was actually thinking about this today. I think about it a lot, especially now that I'm running at this level, that it's one of the first things that people talk about is that I'm Asian American. I've certainly grown since I was in high school and embrace all of myself. And in fact, there's some national conversation I'm having where people think it's so cool that I'm running as an Asian American. I'm an Asian American woman running for governor. And I would have never imagined that being part of my life story when I was growing up. So I'm saying all that to say that it's interesting that I'm being the person that I really needed to see when I was growing up. And I let me backtrack a little bit here. The thought that I had in high school was that I'm not fully American, even though I was born in the United States, I am American,
Yeah.
but I'd also say I'm not fully Asian. That's sort of when you're raised with parents who come from 2 different countries, and
Mhm.
it is the struggle that we have, right? And
Yeah.
so but in high school, I thought I can't because I'm not fully American, and I'm glad that a lot of those beliefs have diminished,
Mhm.
and but I think, in terms of resiliency and grit, there's a lot I had to go through,
Mhm.
as a child, and, I did not ask for those things,
Mhm.
but when I look back, I do, have some gratitude in that it's taught me to wake up every day with a positive attitude, wake up every day wanting to make a difference for other people, looking for ways to make a difference and be intentional about it. Even if it's you don't have to be a politician, you don't have to have a title, you
Mhm.
can open the door for somebody, you can smile and ask somebody how their day is, and
Mhm.
that's always been important to me, and my dad really instilled a lot of that in my sister and I because he knew what we were facing. He faced his own things when he was growing up, and so, um, that's just a part of who I am, and I think it's what gives me the strength to do what I'm doing. There is no clear pathway for me to become governor. Everyone, I think even some of your questions are, "Is it even possible?" People ask me this all the time, and I kinda keep track sometimes, like today, 2 people adamantly telling me that I can't do this, and I have to just shrug it off, and that's harder to do if you don't have your own internal resiliency
Mhm.
mechanisms, right?
Yeah.
So, I think I always wanna push back and say, "You have no idea what I've been through in my life, you have no idea the things I've had to overcome, this isn't as hard as as those things." So, while I had some challenging and difficult times growing up, I am grateful for who it's made me become.
Does it make you feel like you understand the population you're wanting to serve better?
Mhm. Yeah, I think, in the introduction, you shared this a little bit. I do understand what a majority of families are going through. And whether, parents came from a different country or not, the common thread we have is trying to build a family and be in a family and do basic things like pay rent and put gas in the car and pay our utilities and buy groceries and just survive and have a little bit left over to live,
Yeah.
right? And so I know what that's like. I can speak to those challenges that people are facing. And I think right now in politics today at the national level and at the local level, people are looking for leaders who are not just using the right talking points, but who actually understand. And I think you can hear it from candidates who actually understand versus those who are just
Mhm.
trying to get your vote. And so my compassion's very deep, my empathy's very deep, and so is my conviction to make a difference. Um, I get probably relate more to children being raised in households where I know parents are working multiple jobs and they're trying to figure out, parents are doing everything they can to care for their kids. But sure, they like to be home, and you being in healthcare, and I know you're very passionate about children and motherhood, and
Yeah.
parents wanna be home connecting with their kids. They
Mhm,
wanna be reading to their children, and we know all of that helps with academic outcomes,
mhm,
with mental health and healthcare, but parents can't do that because they face so many challenges and stresses financially, and those are policy decisions made by people in power who are keeping families together from being together and doing those things that we know really help a
mhm.
family unit, but also help an economy grow and a state strengthen. All of those things matter, and if you don't understand, you'll overlook them, and I think that's what's happened here in our
Mhm.
state with the leaders who have been in power for the last 2 decades.
Right, exactly. Because it's all about the families, the people that you serve, and that's the hope for any leader that is voted in to
Mhm.
think about the people
Yeah.
and the people they serve and really understand the difficulties that they are facing and how to better solve the issues and problems they do face. And do you speaking of, going back to the point of the first Asian American, do you feel a particular pressure to represent or speak for communities of color? And how do you navigate that role? Just because I think that is a huge topic. You know, we just recently had a huge change in the New York City mayoral
Yeah.
race. And so, how do you feel about that being a representative of a person of color or an immigrant?
Yes. So I would say I feel less, pressure and more responsibility in that, first, for people who look like me or identify, whether it's, your parents immigrated to this country or you are a person of color or you're a woman, I very much notice when I'm in a room and I'm the only woman, I'm the only person of color, I'm the only one that maybe has a different frame of thinking or a way of addressing an issue. And it's my job to show up. I think that's the most basic thing. And then finding the courage every day to speak up. Even if you aren't going to win the battle or the debate, or if you're not going to get your issue, fully through the way that you like to, it's still important to try. And what I try to elevate, even for people who don't have a background like mine, all of us in some ways, in some part of our lives, feel marginalized or feel like we don't belong. And I think my experience in politics and in leadership is really um, a depiction of what's possible. And anything is possible when we make the right investments. Anything is possible when we believe in ourselves to do the things that we know are the right thing to do and to stand up for all communities really, but especially those that are most marginalized. And so for me it is more about a responsibility, and I think what is the positive side of being somebody who doesn't look like the majority, who people look at me and I don't fit the profile of, let alone governor, state representative, or somebody who is this public and this forward facing in our state, is that, again, it goes back to, what do I believe about myself? What do I believe about my neighbors? What do I believe about my future? And I show that each and every day by showing up to do the work. And so, um, and I will tell you, I have had young Asian American girls who have come up to me, I mean, tears in their eyes. I'll never forget, a few years ago, one asked me to sign my autograph in her school notebook, and I was like, "I don't even know, I've never signed an autograph. I don't know what that looks like," I was like, "But I can give you my
Yeah,
signature," and I would have been that little girl. I would have been
yeah,
that one that ran up to the person who I thought, "Oh my gosh, you're doing this thing that I wanna do." And really, it's deep down, it's about possibilities,
yeah.
and I'm catching myself even getting a little emotional because I have to remember that that's why we do what we do. And there's gonna be plenty of doubters and plenty of people who tell me I can't, and that's them projecting their own beliefs about themselves. But there are thousands of people who see the possibility, and that's what I have to hang on to. And Those moments are when I realize, yeah, you have a big responsibility here. You're not gonna be perfect, but you gotta show up.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of what you're doing is showing up and moving forward because right now there's a lot of women out there who want to be represented and they want their voice to matter. They want their issues to be heard and it's important for women to see women in leadership and especially young girls, as you said. That's such a beautiful portrait of what examples are and role models are we sharing with our younger generation, with the future generation, future leaders. What kind of role models, what examples are they seeing and having in front of them? And so I think it's, you know, as you said, there's gonna be a lot of doubters, and I think that's with anything anyone does, but, I love that you're still pushing forward and still, persevering, to be that role model and example for women and those young girls out there. And yeah, I just wanted to say that coming from immigrant or discussion of person of color, but we're all Oklahomans and we all want someone who will represent all of us as a population here in Oklahoma and see what we can, find that is beneficial for all of us, right? Because it's not just about one segment of the population or the other, right?
Yes, yes. And that's a great point that you bring up that, there are some leaders who want to divide us. They want to keep
Mhm.
us at each other's throats. They
Yeah.
they want us to think that because you look different, sound different, worship different, love different, that you're taking away something that we all want.
Mhm.
But really at the end of the day, everybody wants to take care of their children. They want
Yeah.
safety. They want to see their communities prosper. They want to do well. And I think we are at a point in time in our country and in our state where that's what people are truly looking for. And I think they're
Exactly.
going to respond to that type of message. I tell people this all the time that humans can only take so much negativity and ripping each other apart. It may seem fun for a little bit and feel good for a little bit, but as humans, we are thrive on hope and
Mhm.
optimism and a
Yeah.
vision and coming together, even in the
Yeah.
legislature.
Mhm.
It's so interesting because you won't see this in the news all the time, but anytime there is a piece of legislation or something that we get done, in fact, you mentioned the repealing of the state sales tax on groceries. There is this energy that you feel when we come together and truly come together, where there
Mhm.
was real bipartisan effort to get
Yeah.
something done for our constituents.
Mhm.
And I think regardless of what side of the aisle we're on, even the ones that
Yeah.
the members I deeply disagree with on most things, when we can come together,
Yeah.
we get so excited about it,
Mhm.
and we just don't talk about that enough, but when you really feel like you can solve a problem for the people who elected you, that's the good stuff. That's why we did this in the first place. The unfortunate thing is that we don't see enough of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that you mentioned the state, repeal on state tax on groceries. And then you also were involved in protections against step therapy with insurers. And those are bipartisan efforts. And those are things where we have to come across, join hands across the aisle and work together. And given there are a lot of partisan dynamics in Oklahoma, how do you approach working across the aisle?
So I first tried to, I try to remember that everybody's a human being. Everyone has a story.
Mhm.
And really trying to get to know people on a personal level. That helps me not get so caught up in the partisan differences and divisions that we see. And really on a state level, there's so much that Republicans and Democrats can do together because at the end of the day, it's not conservative or liberal to fix a pothole. It's not
Yeah.
conservative or liberal to, figure out how we educate children, or it shouldn't be
Mhm.
anyway. Certainly there's like philosophical differences around how we fund government and where we get that money from and all of that. But at the end of the
Right.
day, we want to solve problems. We want Oklahoma to
Mhm.
do well. It's just always been important to me to build friendships and relationships and all of the
Mhm.
work I've ever done. And I was kind of like this as a kid. You brought up me moving around. I didn't move because my dad was in the army. I moved
Mhm.
because my dad was trying to keep a roof over our head. And
Yeah.
it was about like, hey, if that house down the street gives
Mhm.
us cheaper rent, we're moving in 6 months. I mean, literally, those were the conversations. And sometimes that meant being in different school districts, and so or
Mhm.
not school districts, but school zones in terms of especially elementary school.
Right.
So I was the new kid a lot, and so
Yeah.
I would always look for who could be my friends. Then by the time I got to middle school and high school, I had all these friends, all these coalitions of people,
Right.
and that's kinda how I look at the work I've done in the legislature, and
Mhm.
I love to prove people wrong and prove that, and help them to see that whatever you're thinking about a Democrat or a young woman likely isn't
Mhm.
true. And so I've taken the time to literally reach across the aisle and build relationships. And, there's some people I'm closer to than others, some that allow me to be closer to them than others. I try to get to know their families and something personal about them so that I can connect there. That way, when the debate on an issue that we don't agree on, I don't fight them, I fight the issue. And so when you do that, people look at you as a leader and they look at you as somebody who's taking their job seriously and then also finding out what are the issues we do agree on and reaching out and how we can work together. So some of the bills that you have mentioned, of course, the state sales tax, the repeal on that, the step therapy legislation is one that I will be so proud of for the rest of my life because that bill was actually the idea was actually um, the member who was approached to handle that was the majority leader. And the majority leader has a lot more power than I do and can do first, he's in the party of power. Second, he has a high leadership role. He can do whatever he wants mostly. And so, but he reached out to this coalition of physicians and it's an interesting coalition because it was physicians, pharmaceuticals, and patient advocacy groups against insurance companies. And he said, "You actually should go to the minority leader. I think she would be great at championing this issue. I'll work the Republican side, she'll work the Democratic side, and we can really have a bipartisan win on this bill." And to me, what a compliment for someone who, and he's also running statewide. You can look him up. Our campaigns are gonna look a lot different running statewide, but on this
Right.
issue, we really did work together, and it meant
Mhm.
so much to me that he thought so highly of me and trusted me with the issue, and I'm very grateful because I know we've saved lives. I also know it hasn't been implemented perfectly, so there's some things we can do to strengthen the law, but I believe that people who need access to healthcare shouldn't be stopped because an insurance company decides that, they're not gonna cover it. And of
Mhm.
course, this being in healthcare, people who have chronic diseases,
Mhm.
think MS, epilepsy, diabetes, and really it happens to all of us, but those who have to
Mhm.
pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for medication and trying to figure out what will work,
Mhm.
we should be able to trust our doctors on that and not
Yeah.
rely on an insurance company. And it
Yeah.
saves the state of Oklahoma money, saves Oklahomans money, and so for me, I think where my colleagues have seen and trust me, I am positive I irritate some of them because the Democratic leader, I'm also the lead voice, opposing a lot of what they're advocating for that I don't think is right for Oklahomans and doesn't
Right.
help everybody. But I think overall, they do appreciate my willingness to work together and be respectful and civil and figure out ways to solve problems together.
I think that's the key. We're not enemies. We're
Mm,
just debating differences of philosophies of
yeah.
how to get things done. That's what I think we got to get back to understanding
Mhm.
is that we're not enemies. We're all wanting to solve the same problem. Sometimes we just have different ways to do it.
Mhm.
Sometimes we want to figure out which way is the best way, right? And so I think that's what people have to remember. That's what the government is about.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to solve a problem, and that should be the same. That should be the aim.
And you should want healthy debate because, this is a biblical, Christian biblical saying, but iron sharpens iron. You want the best idea to make it through. And
Mhm.
we should be building those relationships and figuring out a way to do that. And I think actually
Mhm.
when you get to know somebody, your debate is at such a higher level. You're
Mhm.
really focused on the issue and not
Yeah.
focused on being ugly towards the other,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so and that was something I had to learn. I mean, early on in my legislative career, I didn't attack people, but
Mhm.
I always had my little notes and I was scared that I would mess up. I didn't want to offend anybody. And I learned that as you get to know people, and of course, as you gain confidence in anything that you
Yeah.
do, a lot of that has changed. And I try not to, I really work hard not to attack the person. I
Mhm.
focus more on. the issue. But I'm gonna
Yeah.
hold the person in power accountable. I think
Yeah.
that's a little different than this
Yeah,
pointing.
that's different because everyone in leadership has to be held accountable for what they are responsible for. And so that's something very important. Um, Talking about healthcare too, rural healthcare is a pressing issue across Oklahoma due to recent changes. And I think just heard there's a hospital in Bristow that just got bought by St. Francis that is going to be able to get back to up and running. But there's a lot of rural hospitals in Oklahoma that are not able to keep up due to hospital closures from cuts in funding and all sorts of things. So, what kind of steps would you prioritize improve access to healthcare in rural areas?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and as I have been out traveling the state, and when I'm in rural areas, that is the biggest issue or the priority issue that rural Oklahomans have. Part of
Mhm.
it, I think, is because there was some hope in 2020 when Oklahomans decided to expand Medicaid,
Yes.
and that was, I think there was this feeling of, okay, we
Mhm.
can unlock some of those federal dollars, bring them to our state, and save our hospitals, save our services. And of course, with everything going on now at the national level, I mean, quite frankly, even before HR 1 passed and those Medicaid
Mhm.
cuts they will be implemented here soon. I
Mhm.
would say voted on and
Yeah.
supported by Republicans. There was already vulnerability with a lot of our hospitals
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
and part of it is because our rural communities just don't have the economic opportunities that urban areas do. But
Mhm.
part of that is because we don't have hospitals and we don't have the things that are necessary to take care of people to bring business to our state.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we have the tribes who have,
Mhm.
they go above and beyond to provide healthcare for their own
Yeah.
members and citizens of their tribes, and then expanding that out to communities that need access. But
Mhm.
when we look to the future and when I think about being governor and what that looks like, the reality is that we're going to have to find funding to protect our hospitals because we are constitutionally required now to meet those Medicaid expectations around funding. The problem is that will make some hard decisions that there are gonna be hard decisions we're gonna have to make around education, infrastructure, public safety. I mean, everything unless we get more revenue.
Mhm.
And I think some ways that we can look at increasing revenue is where are we giving tax credits to people who don't really need them? Where are we spending money that isn't really trickling down to helping a majority of Oklahomans?
Mhm.
The other piece of it is I think we just have to face the reality, and the truth is that the extreme policies that have been implemented in Oklahoma, like banning access to abortion and reproductive health care in this state, has pushed doctors out of our state. It makes it very difficult to recruit doctors to want to practice here, even if they aren't providing reproductive health care services or services for women's health care. It is the constant motivation, I guess, to criminalize doctors, to put in policies things
Mhm.
that do not align with what doctors and physicians and those in healthcare have been trained to do.
Mhm.
And it's a tough topic to talk about, I think, for a lot of people, but I do believe in telling the truth and elevating why we are where we're at. And so I think having a leader, the leader in the government, the top leader in state government, to say we appreciate what doctors are doing. We want to undo those extreme policies, and we want to figure out ways to provide funding. Now, as a physician's assistant, I know you know this, and we have done a lot around nurse practitioners and things like that to expand healthcare
Mhm.
access in rural areas. But
Yeah.
I still think we have to make sure we find ways to have doctors in
Mhm.
rural communities and have hospitals with a wide range of
Yeah.
services for people that are newborn babies to our aging population. People in their 70s and 80s can't drive back and forth to Oklahoma City. Part of it is an affordability issue. The other piece is just true healthcare, right? They
Yeah.
they can't do that.
Mhm.
And for many of them, their children or grandchildren, they may live in rural areas and try to support their parents and grandparents, but a lot of them also live in urban Oklahoma. And so
Mhm.
it's really hard to balance all of that. So I think first it starts with just understanding that reality. The second is figuring out how we can work together for stable funding to keep these hospitals open. But the reality is that there are going to be closures, services will be removed. Right now, even in an urban setting. So a lot of times I'll get the
Mhm.
question, well, you represent Oklahoma City. Why are you talking so much about rural healthcare? Well, it's all interconnected. When rural folks don't have what they need, they come to hospitals in my district, and that puts a strain on the system. That keeps people, both rural and urban Oklahomans then can't access the healthcare that they need. With these Medicaid cuts, hospitals in Oklahoma City too are looking at how are they financing the things that they need to finance in order to provide services. Well, they're readjusting all of that knowing that cuts are coming. So that means less services for everybody. So it all matters. And as I travel the state, I'm having more in-depth conversations. So happy to come back to share more on that issue, especially with your background, because I think
Yeah,
it's really important.
for
I will
sure.
be having meetings with hospital administrators and other folks who do provide services to rural Oklahoma and what their challenges are and some solutions that they may have too. But I know in state government, the thing that we have to do is fund healthcare.
Yeah, I see that on a daily basis, how patients struggling to find that balance in accessing healthcare in their rural areas and sometimes having to come to Oklahoma City area. But it's a struggle for the families, for them, for everyone involved. And it's a huge issue, access to healthcare in rural Oklahoma. And as you said, actually is very important that there is an issue in attracting physicians to Oklahoma, I do believe, and that can be just the nature of reproductive services or also just even the higher liability that physicians face here in Oklahoma compared to other states too. And so that is a problem. And even getting specialists in rural Oklahoma, that's something that's
Yeah, it's
hard to do. How are and so we're really at a crossroads here to figure out how to best care, and, it does put a strain on the urban hospitals, just as you said, with the number of patients being seen, staffing issues. It's just a kind of a huge issue in healthcare right now. And hopefully we can come to some solutions, restructure things a little bit better. So I look forward to hearing what you have to, come up with after talking to more healthcare leaders too. So, like, similarly, education, that's another issue because we are 50th in the United States of America in education. And there has been a lot of, um, you know, uh, quite nationwide news, I would say, on that point. Everything from, leaders in education to just this past week, there's been issues with universities and
Mm, mm.
um, things. So how would you address education and, as a governor, what can you do for education in Oklahoma?
I think, first it's absolutely embarrassing that we're 50th. It doesn't have to be this way. It shouldn't be this way. When I was in high school, Governor Brad Henry was governor. And Democratic governor and a more balanced legislature, we were ranked 17th in the nation for public education. And I think what people get caught up on is they think about our former state superintendent who was awful, who should have been held accountable long before, he left office, but he's not what got us to 50th. It is the Republicans who have been in the legislature and the governor's mansion that got us here because that 50th number is based on funding, it's based on how we pay our teachers, and then all of that ends up highlighting our outcomes. And so when we're underfunding our schools, and the last statistic I heard is about $1.6 billion regionally. So we're also last in the region, meaning Texas, New Mexico, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, they all invest more in their students than we do per pupil. So we're behind in per pupil expenditures, we're behind in teacher pay and staff pay. And so when you underfund the very infrastructure you need in order to find success in those classrooms, this is where we end up. And the person or the people in charge of that is the legislature and the governor, because we have to work together to figure out the best budget to put forth to invest in our schools and really in all of state government, but specifically here since we're talking about public education. And so one of the things that I am actually most optimistic about as a Democratic governor, and the reality is I will likely still have a Republican majority legislature. I hope that we break the supermajority in this election cycle, but it's likely that they will still be in charge. I think this is a place where the governor can come and talk to legislators on both sides of the aisle and say, what is a number we can land on that's actually going to move the needle? We know what it needs to be. We know we're $1.6 billion behind, but what is a number we can land on to work together to improve our rankings and improve making sure that teachers and students have access to the resources that they need. Teacher pay is something that Republicans and Democrats talk about all the time. In this last legislative session, you had members on both sides of the aisle in both chambers that had a teacher pay raise ranging anywhere between $3,000 and $10,000 a year. And I think we can find a middle ground and figure out a way to do something significant for teachers and our staff. But when you have a governor who says, do not send me a budget that has any significant increases in any area of state government because I'm going to veto that budget. Well, that sort of ends all the conversations, right?
Yeah.
So having a vision around how we can improve public education around funding first, because we have to. That is the struggle that we're facing right now. And one of the ways that we can shift some dollars, I will never sign a bill that puts public monies into private schools. That is not the best place to use taxpayer dollars. It is unpopular, and it doesn't help the majority of Oklahoma families that send their children to public schools. 90% of our families send their children to public schools, and that's in rural Oklahoma and in urban Oklahoma. And guess who represents a majority of rural Oklahoma? Republicans. And they're going to want to do everything they can to better support their schools. And I think having a leader in the governor's mansion who says, let's find a way to work together and make this happen. Because similar to physicians, we're losing teachers not just to other states, we're losing them to other industries. They
Yeah.
can make more money, they
Yeah.
can have more time with their families, and so they're making other career options, which I can understand. When their state's not supporting them, I think the average teacher now is spending somewhere between 5 and 8 years in the classroom. For a long time, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Teachers are in the classroom for a full career, 20 to 30 years,
Yeah.
and that is a disservice to, not just our education system, but to our families and to our students. And so one thing I would add to that that really we have to address, what I think is the root cause also, is going back to what I was saying about taking care of families and the economic challenges that families face. Children are showing up to the classroom hungrier,
Yeah.
more stressed, they have more anxiety, they're taking on a lot of what is going on at home into the classroom, and teachers are expected to take care of all of that.
Yeah.
And that's just unfair. And so, if we can get families to make higher wages, to have better benefits, to have both parents or at least a parent at home to be with their child, to work on academics and just do family things and have dinner together and all those things that we hear about, I think we're going to see better outcomes in our schools and academically. But it is incumbent upon the legislature and the governor to provide more funding that actually supports our schools.
Yeah. Childhood help with childcare
Yes.
for working families. That's really important. And then going back to even, what you said about the anxiety, the food insecurity that kids are facing. I think that also is something that is tied with mental health
Mhm.
and the need for better mental health access, increased and improved and mental health programs, within the state too. And that's also something that's really important to keep up with too.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I know I have a whole lot of
I
other
know, I just
questions
wanna
for you.
keep talking, I love this.
But I know you're so busy, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. What exactly motivated you to take that leap from
Mhm,
legislature
mm,
to actual, statewide office of
mhm.
governor?
I don't think there's one thing. Um, when I look back on when I finalized the decision earlier in the year, it really was thinking about 2 things. One, I turned 40 in May, and I think we all get to a point in our careers, and public service is a career, and it's very fulfilling, and it can be a career. I think we hear, career politician and all this negativity around it, building it as a career. When I think about a career, I mean, I think about taking something seriously, being good at it, sharpening my skills, figuring out how I can build more relationships and better collaboration so I can do the thing have always wanted to do, which is serve people. So I was thinking about, where am I professionally, and can I be stretched, and is there more that I can do? I had one more term that I could run for to be state representative, and I would have run for leader again. And I think I would have been perfectly fine there, but I really was in a place where I felt like I wanna be challenged more. I wanna see, can I take these skills to a higher level? Can I serve more people? I'm so passionate about the entire state. And when you're in the legislature, while you have your own district, you still have to think statewide. But when you're a legislative leader, and you're the caucus leader, you have to do have to think statewide because people are now looking at you as a state leader. Hearing from folks across the state, traveling the state just made me more and more passionate about finding solutions to the challenges people are facing. The other side of it was I sensed very early on that 2026 was going to be a critical year for change, especially after the reelection of Donald Trump. And I thought, even in a state like Oklahoma, I think we can truly capitalize on an opportunity to elevate the message that Democrats have around education, healthcare, the economy, and really challenge Republicans on what they're doing here in our state. They've had power for 20 years, and we have moved to the bottom on every good list and the top of every bad list. And so as I'm thinking, well, who's going to run for governor? People would ask me, who's running for governor? And I'll be honest, people have asked me plenty of times to run for Congress. Everyone thinks like that's the next step for everybody. And I was like, I love state government. I love the state of Oklahoma. I want to find more ways to help, being right here where you can make a huge impact and walk out the door, and my neighbors are my constituents and I can see them every day, and I could do that as a statewide elected official. And so the conversations kept happening, the question kept coming back to me, and so it was one of those moments where I had to look in the mirror and say, you know what you want out of a governor, you know what you want out of a candidate, so go do it. And I made that decision, and it was funny because I told my family, "I think this is what I'm thinking about doing." My dad, who by the way is a Trump Republican, when I told him I was gonna run for the state house, his response was, "I knew we were going to the governor's mansion." And I go, "I'm just trying to get to the state house." Like, I don't even know if we can get there. This was back in 2013, and when I said, I wanna run for governor, I think I'm gonna do it, and my dad said, "Oh, I'm gonna be your first security guard, your first detail," or something like that, you know? And so, I'm saying all that to say that there are some people in my life who are like, of course, for me, I was
Yeah.
like, I didn't think this is what I'd be doing. But that's what it was. It was a mix of personal, where am I at personally, and where professionally what I thought would be right. And then the public service side is just, I think, so deeply and believe so deeply that women and women like us should be stepping up in roles that seem impossible,
Yeah.
to show people actually is possible. Just doing the work is possible.
That's pretty awesome. And I just also wanted to talk about that. The word affordability, I
Mhm.
think, has been a huge word recently. And what does that mean to you?
Goodness, that's a great question. It has been used a lot. I hope it doesn't become a buzzword, but to me, when I hear about affordability, I think about just being able to live. There are so many, and quite frankly, there is a real statistic, 45% of our working families, meaning they go to work, many of them have multiple jobs, they cannot make ends meet. To me, affordability is about, it's not just about paying bills, it's also about, again, being able to be with family, being able to dream about doing the things that you're passionate about. When you're stuck in this cycle of paycheck comes in, paycheck goes out, paying the bill, paycheck comes in, paycheck goes out, you live in a lot of stress and it's hard to think beyond surviving in your home. So, really, I think affordability is about thriving. It's about being able to do more for yourself and for your family and for your community. And I think there's so many people, whether we agree or disagree on issues, that they want to lend a helping hand. They do lend helping hands. But at the same time, it's really hard. I think a lot of people hold back on things that they're really meant to do in ways of flourishing because they can't afford to live and do the basic things they need to do. So affordability to me is about thriving.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Because when you're living to survive, that's all you're thinking about. But when you live to thrive, you can actually fulfill dreams.
Mhm, mhm,
And so, thank you so much,
mhm.
Cindy, for joining me today. And I know I've taken up a lot of time, but maybe we can, have another second chat later on.
Love
Talk
that.
about other issues that come up as the year moves on closer to election day.
Yeah, happy to
And
do that.
Yeah, thank you again for your time, and I appreciate all that you are trying to do. And I hope that, we can think of it, as I said, it's not about enemies across the aisle. It's about working together. It's about solving solutions for all of us
Yes.
equally as Oklahomans,
Yes.
no matter what population we're a part of, no matter what part of Oklahoma we're a part of. We're all Oklahomans, and we want a leader who will represent all of us equally and hopefully solve the very important issues of healthcare, education, and many other things that our Oklahomans are facing today. So I appreciate your time, and I hope that we can see some positive change in Oklahoma. Thank you so much for this powerful episode. What stands out most from leader Cyndi Munson is the reminder that extraordinary leadership often comes from humble beginnings, from families working multiple jobs, from children learning resilience through instability, from communities shaped by generosity and grit. It is also a reminder that leadership isn't about titles, it's about people. It's about showing up with courage, listening with humility, and choosing to build a future where every individual, every family, every community has a chance to thrive. Our guest reminded us that change starts locally in conversations, in compassion, and in the daily decisions we make to lift others up. Whether you're working in medicine, raising little ones, serving in your community, or dreaming of stepping into leadership yourself, may this episode encourage you to use your voice boldly and purposefully. If this conversation inspired you, share it with a friend, leave a review, connect with us online. Your support helps bring these stories of hope and leadership to more people who need them. Until next time, keep leading with heart, keep dreaming big, and keep showing up for the mission that matters most. Thank you. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions. We hope you found inspiration, insight, and a sense of connection in the stories we shared today. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram for updates, free downloads, and join a community of like-minded individuals passionate about making a difference through medicine, motherhood, and mission work. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Until next time, keep sparking hope, keep healing, keep nurturing, and keep making a difference. This is Johanna signing off from Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions.